Are you one of the many people that has tried using EQ before and thought, this kinda sounds bad? Well, we need to have a little bit of a chat about AutoEQ. A lot of people EQ their headphones to change or make improvements to the tuning of them, and if done properly, this can be the single biggest improvement to your headphone listening experience. There's a few different ways in which you can do this. You can either practice and get good at identifying colorations by ear so that you can dial things in exactly to your preferences, or you can look at measurements of headphones to see visually what areas you might want to adjust. But a lot of people take this second approach a step further and use AutoEQ. This is where a hardware product or a software tool generates an EQ profile and adjustment for you based on measurements of a headphone. You can find this in products like the Luxon X9 or tools like Squiglink, which will automatically create EQ profiles that you can then run in any tool of your choosing. Some people also use pre-made profiles or convolution filters like those sold by AccurateSound, but the problem is that most people, reasonably enough, assume that either these convolution filters or AutoEQ profiles are actually going to be correcting their headphones to match the Harman target or the diffuse field target or whatever target you've picked. In reality, that is not what's happening at all, and so today, by looking at what is happening with these headphones, with AutoEQ, with convolution filters on real human heads, we can start to get a bit of a better picture as to why AutoEQ might not be such a good idea. I'm Golden Sound, you're watching The Headphone Show by Headphones.com, and today we're going to have a look at how a couple different headphones behave across 4 real human heads, not just measurement rigs, what they look like inherently, and what they're doing when you apply some of these AutoEQ profiles and convolution filters. Then we're going to have a little bit of a chat about how you can do things better and fix some of the problems that we're about to show. But before we dive into the measurements, I need to do a quick explainer. When you measure a headphone, there are 2 main ways to actually show that measurement. The first and simplest being a raw or uncompensated measurement, which simply shows exactly what the microphone inside the measurement rig captured. Raw measurements have the issue though that you're not just showing what the headphone is doing, you're showing what the headphone and the head and ears of the rig are doing. So you can't compare a raw measurement taken on a grass rig to a raw measurement taken on a B&K 5128 because even if you're measuring the exact same headphone, they're going to look very different because the head and ears are very different. Raw measurements are also a little bit trickier to judge because you have to have an idea of what normal should look like for a particular rig. This measurement, for example, that sudden rise around 3 kHz, for those who aren't super familiar with headphone measurements, that's not the headphone being super bright, that's just where the ears on that rig naturally amplify that area of sound. So that's not something you want to correct because they'd be doing that for real world sound as well. The solution to this problem is to use an HRTF compensated measurement, which means we take away all of the effects of how the head and ears of a rig usually modify sound so that we're left with just what the headphone is doing. But in order to be able to do this, you need to know what the HRTF, the head-related transfer function, or how the head and ears of a rig are usually modifying sound, is. And recently, we embarked on a bit of a project to get our own head and ears characterized in London. You can go and watch that video here, but armed with this data, our own in-ear mics and our own HRTF characterizations, we can now show you exactly how headphones are behaving on our own heads and compare them to each other as well, both before and after applying some of these AutoEQ profiles to see how close or far away from some of these targets they actually get. So let's have a look. This is an HRTF compensated measurement of the Sennheiser HD600 on my own head, so how I hear the headphone is shown on this graph. I can use a tone generator, sweep through, and all of the peaks and dips line up exactly with what is shown here. But how I hear the HD600 is not exactly the same as how Resolve, for instance, hears the HD600. If we compare the two, at low frequencies they're pretty similar, and the differences here are mostly just going to be down to us getting a slightly different seal. The lower mids are basically identical, but once we start getting towards about 1 to 3 kHz where our pinna, the actual ears themselves, really start making a difference, that's where things start to get not so similar. In fact, if we show the results for all of us, myself, Resolve, Griffin, and Caleb, the higher in frequency we go, the more substantial variation there is. Now, our HRTFs have already been compensated away from all of these measurements. This is just showing the differences in what we are actually hearing compared to each other. But despite that, there's still some pretty substantial variation, and this is called HPTF variation. This is where, even though we have taken our actual normal head and ear effects out of the equation, because headphones are very, very close to our ears and the geometry interacts in slightly unpredictable ways, we do still get some unpredictable variances between different listeners. This is a problem if we want to actually correct the headphone to match any particular target or sound any particular way on any particular one of us. I can go to hangout.audio, grab a measurement taken on a grass rig, and generate an AutoEQ profile and then see what it does to the real result. This EQ profile will perfectly correct the headphone to match this target if your head and ears are absolutely identical to a grass rig, which they won't be. So on my head, this is what I get. Overall, I'd certainly say that this auto-EQ'd result is better than how the headphone performs out of the box on my head, but it's certainly still not perfect. The bass is way closer to where it should be, the mid-range tracks closer to a true diffuse field tilt response with some of that 1 kHz honkiness taken care of as well, and generally auto-EQ is going to work pretty well for low frequencies since, as we saw in the earlier measurements, there's not usually going to be much variation between different people there as long as you're getting a reasonable seal. But the treble, before and after EQ, is very much just different. 5 kHz is about the same. There's two new peaks that were not there before, now present at just over 6 kHz and another at 8.5. The dip that I had at 8 kHz is filled in some, but it's still there. And a new dip has been created just under 10 kHz and actually another one just above 16 kHz. If we have a look at the actual on-head auto-EQ'd results for Resolve, Griffin, and Caleb, it's a very similar story. Bass is generally better, though arguably still needs some work. Mid-range again tracks closer to where it should be, but treble is a crapshoot. Because headphones in the real world do behave quite differently on different individual listeners' heads, they simply do not respond to auto-EQ profiles in the way that most people think they will. They're not going to get corrected to perfectly match a target because your head and ears are not going to interact with the headphone in exactly the same way that the measurement rigs once did. Okay, so what about if we use a convolution filter instead of EQ, and one that was made using real measurements of a headphone with in-ear microphones on a real person's head? Mitch from AccurateSound sells convolution profiles for headphones that he makes using in-ear microphones. If we have a look at the one for the HD600, on the product page it certainly looks like, yeah, this should make everything perfectly flat, which perfectly flat is not what you want to be going for in a headphone anyway, but regardless, that's a bit besides the point. Let's give this one a go. This is what the HD600 profile from AccurateSound actually looks like, and you'll notice that it doesn't try to correct things above about 7 kHz, because past that point the individual listener variations are just way too substantial and unpredictable, so there's no point even trying to correct them. Though, as we saw earlier, 7 kHz is probably still way too high in frequency, realistically up to about 2 kHz at best. And when the HD600 is measured on my head with this convolution filter applied, this is what we get. We still have some pretty big problems. Bass is lifted, but still rolls off a lot under 40 kHz. The mid-range is almost dead flat rather than having a tilted response, which makes it sound quite thin and honky, especially with that remaining bump at 1.5 kHz. And then the treble has just been kind of nuked, except for 6 kHz, leaving it sounding overall far darker, thinner, and shoutier than it should. Overall, to me, this is not an improvement. Mid-bass and mid-range are now just outright worse. The 3 to 4 kHz area is now way too low, so things just don't really sound present. It does help to tame that 5.5 kHz peak a bit, but the rest of the treble is again just kind of different to what we had before, not really better or worse. Let's again take a look at the results on Resolve, Griffin, and Caleb's heads too, and similar problems remain. Now, some of these are probably down to the core point of this video. Headphones behave differently on different people's heads, so a correction profile made from measurements on a rig or made from measurements on a particular person's head are not going to be universally applicable. As much as I would like there to be, sadly there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all correction profile for a headphone. Some of this could also just be down to Mitch's own approach to making these convolution filters. So for example, he's using in-ear microphones to measure the headphones and generate the correction profiles, but I don't know if he's actually taking his own head and ears, his own HRTF out of the equation before outputting the correction profiles. The fact that the 3 to 5 kHz area, when we measured the headphones with this convolution filter applied on all of our heads, ended up way too low, suggests he's probably not. That's an area where your ear will naturally bump things up quite a lot, like what you'd see on any raw measurement of a headphone. And so if he measures the headphone on his head, his ear will naturally bump that up. The correction profile, if he doesn't do any proper compensation, will try and pull it down way too much, and the end result is that area ends up way too low on all of our heads in reality. The bass and mid-range stuff, I think, is just because he's going for a perfectly flat target rather than any kind of Harman filters or diffuse field tilt. Perfectly flat's not what you want to be going for in headphones, but that's a approach issue, not a measurement issue. Some of you might be thinking though, well, aren't convolution filters still better than EQ anyway? Because won't they also be correcting for the phase and timing behavior of a headphone, not just the frequency response? Well, they can, if they are properly correcting the frequency response, which sadly these ones aren't, but so will EQ. Headphones are what's called minimum phase devices, which means that the phase response of them and the frequency response of them are inherently linked. In fact, you can directly predict one from the other. If you want to correct the phase response of a headphone, you correct the frequency response of it, and both of them get quote-unquote fixed. But also, despite the marketing on AccurateSound's product pages, their convolution files are not doing any kind of special phase or timing adjustment. In fact, we can show this by just looking at the phase response of the convolution filter in Room EQ Wizard and then generating a minimum phase response. The phase response we'd get if we did exactly the same thing with regular old EQ, and they are exactly the same. This excess phase line here shows the difference between the phase response of the convolution and the expected minimum phase response, and it is dead flat because there is no difference. In this context, a convolution filter is just an EQ preset in a box. That's all. It's not doing anything special with timing or phase, nor would you want it to be. There is a time and a place for convolution filters, particularly with speaker room correction, where either because of the complexity of the adjustment you want to make, a convolution filter can be a lot more convenient, whereas with a headphone, you don't want to be super precise and convenient to something that it isn't going to match the behavior on your head anyway, so it's a bit pointless. And you also don't want to be doing any separate phase and timing adjustment on a headphone because they are minimum phase, whereas speaker systems are not. So with headphones, I don't think I can move past this point without saying that the idea of selling individual headphone presets for hundreds of dollars is a little crazy. You can do all of this yourself with regular old EQ. Convolution filters are not better. They're not doing anything different. Just use EQ. Let's move on. Let's try a second headphone, and this time let's also try measuring it on a measurement rig that is supposedly much more like a real human, the B&K 5128. The B&K 5128 is a much more modern and realistic measurement rig compared to the older grass rig, but it is also quite an expensive bit of kit. So if you like what we do on this channel and you want to help support us, consider joining the YouTube channel membership. That goes directly to us on the content team and the content budget, so it supports us directly, or join the Sonic Plus membership on headphones.com, where actually you get the cost of your subscription back as store credit to spend on new headphones, a new DAC, new gear, whatever you like. Headphones.com makes everything that we do on this channel possible, so if you want to support us, consider headphones.com for your next audio purchase, or join the channel membership to support the content that we do directly. So, we measured the Sennheiser HD600 on all four of our heads, the same unit, and these were the results. Once again, very similar bass behavior, similar lower mid-range behavior, and then towards 1 to 3 kHz, it starts varying wildly. This is why people can't agree on which headphone is best. It's not that you're deaf or the person you're speaking to is wrong, you're probably just hearing very different things. Now, let's generate an AutoEQ profile and see what happens to the real behavior on my head. This is the headphones before, and this is after. Bass is quite a bit better. Mid-range is mostly just tilted different, though I do actually prefer the auto-EQ'd response here. And then 1 to 3 kHz is now actually way too high and makes the headphone quite shouty for me after auto-EQ. Caleb, interestingly, did actually get a result that works really quite well. The auto-EQ gave him a pretty good adjustment, but for the rest of us, it's messy. If we also then have a look at the HD600 on our heads with Mitch's AccurateSound convolution filter, again, we have still some pretty wild treble variation. 3 to 5 kHz once again is way too low on all of us, and a mid-range profile that is actually tilted a bit better than what we saw on the HD600, but still lacking a bit of bass. So what is the solution here? If AutoEQ doesn't actually work to really correct a headphone on your head, and there's still some pretty wild treble variation going on no matter what can you do to do it better, to get them to actually reach a particular target, or just to sound as good as possible? Well, if you're really determined, you can get some in-ear mics measured, fly to London, pay a bunch of money to a lab to get your own HRTF characterized, fly back, measure the headphones on your head with those in-ear mics, compensate your HRTF away, and then auto-EQ them, and it'll be basically perfect. But for a sane person, you can use auto-EQ just as a starting point. AutoEQ will usually get the bass and lower mid-range pretty spot on because as long as you're getting a good seal, there's not really much variation from person to person there, so AutoEQ is totally fine. It is the treble where, as we saw, there's going to be quite a bit of variation remaining, but there is a reasonably easy way to take care of that. With my HD600 AutoEQ profile applied, I can put them on and then spin up a tone generator. I can sweep through and hear suddenly, oh, there is a big peak around 6 kHz, let's pull that down a bit. Okay, there's also a big dip at about 8 kHz, let's bump that up a bit. The 4 kHz area is a little louder than everything else below, so I'll pull that down just a tad, and then in a few minutes, with just 4 EQ bands, suddenly I've got a profile that is looking much better than what I was getting with just AutoEQ standalone. The difference between a generically applied AutoEQ profile and one that is even mildly personalized to your own ears, just done with a tone generator in a couple minutes, can be huge.
That is shockingly different. Oh yeah, no, it makes the AutoEQ one sound really bad.
There are a couple other problems with AutoEQ that we haven't even really talked about yet. Firstly, AutoEQ is assuming that not only is a headphone behaving exactly the same on your head as it behaved on a rig, it's assuming that your headphone is exactly the same as the one that was measured, and unit variation is a thing. I asked Resolve to go back home and measure his HD600, and his one seems to be a little bit brighter. Now, Sennheiser's usually pretty good with unit variation, but pad wear is a thing that will affect stuff, and other manufacturers in particular in the past have been shown to have wild unit variation. So if you're trying to correct for a big peak or an overall brighter headphone that is different from your one, even though it's the same model, it's not going to work. There's also just the fact that your left and right ears are not going to be exactly the same as each other. Put on any pair of headphones, go do a tone sweep and see if that tone stays absolutely dead center in the middle the whole time. I guarantee it won't, and it's not necessarily because your headphones have channel imbalance, but just the headphones are interacting slightly differently with your slightly asymmetrical ears. On this particular pair of HD800S, Griffin actually gets pretty similar results on both sides. He's got pretty symmetrical ears by the looks of it, but still not exactly the same. Caleb's gets some fairly meaningful difference from 2 to 5 kHz, and Resolve just got straight up much more of an 8 kHz peak on his left ear compared to his right. So again, a generic EQ profile might work well for one ear, but not so much for the other, and it's going to be worth playing about to see which one sits right in the middle. Or if you are really determined, apply individual corrections to both sides, and then you can really dial things in. So what is the summary here? Well, AutoEQ is not a bad tool. It often will make quite substantial improvements, particularly at either lower frequencies or if the headphone itself was just really not great to begin with. If there's a headphone that is way too bright, chances are AutoEQ is going to help. But it's important to understand the limitations of it. It's important to understand that headphones will not behave exactly the same on your head as they do on a particular measurement rig or the head of the person sitting next to you. Many people think that EQ makes things sound worse because the EQ profiles they have tried do make things sound worse. But if you either learn to EQ comprehensively yourself, get to grips with using a tone generator to make those fine-grained adjustments, or use AutoEQ as a starting point, as a baseline, and then touch things up so that it fits you better, you can get really quite amazing results. And the better you get with EQ, I promise you, it is the single biggest improvement that you can make to your listening experience. It's just that sadly, there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all profile, and there is a little bit of practice to be had. I hope you enjoyed that video and found it interesting. If you've got any questions that you wanted to ask me or the others about EQ, headphones, measurements, anything at all, then come and say hey in the Headphones.com Discord server or the Headphones.com forum, where I and other wiggly ear enthusiasts will endeavor to help. Until next time, I'm Golden Sound. You're watching The Headphone Show by Headphones.com. Thanks for watching.